Hello everyone, welcome back to Dr. Corda's medical coding classes. So in this session, I'm going to explain you about a part 2 of chapter 1, first chapter, that is certain infectious and parasitic diseases. In part 1, I have already discussed about HIV, infectious agents as the cause of disease classified elsewhere, and resistance to antibiotics. So in today's session, the first one is sepsis, severe sepsis and septic shock. So what is sepsis? Sepsis is basically a complication of infection. So the code for sepsis is A40 series or A41 series. So if in the documentation the doctor reports as sepsis, the code will be A40 or A41. It will be determined on the basis of type of microorganism. The A40 series includes Streptococcus sepsis, different types of Streptococcus, and A41 includes other microorganism. And if the type of microorganism is unspecified, then we have to take A41.9, that is sepsis unspecified organism. Then the next one is severe sepsis. The code for severe sepsis is R65.2. So you have to take the code for severe sepsis only if the physician documents either as severe sepsis or as sepsis with associated organ dysfunction or sepsis with associated organ failure. So if it is the case of severe sepsis, then the first code will be the code for the underlying systemic infection, that is sepsis code. Okay, so even for severe sepsis, the first code will be A40 or A41 series only. And the second code will be the code for severe sepsis, that is R65.2 series. R65.2 includes two codes, R65.20 and R65.21. R65.20 is severe sepsis without septic shock and R65.21 is severe sepsis with the septic shock. Okay, and the third code is if there is any documentation regarding an associated organ failure or organ dysfunction, then you have to report that code. So here the condition is that R65.2 can never be given as the principal code. Okay, even if it is the case of severe sepsis, the first code should be that of the underlying systemic infection. That is, here it is sepsis. Okay, so even if it is for severe sepsis, the first code will be A40 or A41 sepsis code and the second code will be R65.2 severe sepsis code. Another one important point is the organ dysfunction must be associated with the sepsis. If it is mentioned in the documentation as the organ dysfunction is related to some other condition, then we cannot take it as sepsis. Okay, do not code. We cannot take it as severe sepsis. That is, do not code R65.2. Okay, that is, if it is clearly mentioned in the documentation as the organ dysfunction is related to some other condition, means you have to code it separately and sepsis separately. It is not the case of severe sepsis. And the third one is septic shock, that is circulatory failure associated with the sepsis. So if in the documentation it is written as septic shock, then your first code will be here also underlying systemic infection, that is sepsis. So the first code will be A40 or A41 series, that is sepsis codes, and the second one will be R65.21 severe sepsis with the septic shock, and the third code will be the associated organ dysfunction or organ failure if any is present. Next one is sepsis or severe sepsis with the localized infection. So, if at all any localized infection, for example, if pneumonia or cellulitis or like some localized infection is present along with sepsis or severe sepsis, then how to sequence the condition. So what you have to look is what is the reason for admission. Here the A is reason for admission is sepsis. So if the patient is admitted for sepsis and he is having some localized infection, For example, pneumonia, then our first code will be the code for sepsis, that is A40 or A41 series. And the second code will be localized infection. So if it is pneumonia, it will be code for pneumonia. Okay, then the B is reason for admission is severe sepsis. If the case is severe sepsis and a localized infection is present, then our first code will be the code for sepsis, as R65.2 cannot be coded first. Okay, so our first code will be that code for sepsis only, A40 or A41 series. The second one will be the localized infection code, and the third one is R65.2 code, the code for sepsis, severe sepsis. Okay, then C, reason for admission is localized infection, that is patient comes to hospital with a localized infection, and after admission he develops sepsis or severe sepsis. Then the first code will be the code for the localized infection, and the second code will be sepsis. If it is a severe sepsis, means the third code will be code for severe sepsis, R65.2. Next one is sepsis due to post-procedural infection. So what is post-procedural infection? Post-procedure means after a procedure. Okay, so infection that occurs after a procedure, due to that procedure. Okay, and sepsis arises from that. In that case, the first code will be T81.40 to T81.43, infection following procedure. And the second code will be T81.44, sepsis following procedure. And the third code will be the code to identify infectious agent. That is a code from B95, B96 series to identify the microorganism that causes the sepsis. And the fourth code will be R65.2 if it is severe sepsis. Okay, then if any associated organ dysfunction is mentioned, code for that also. Next condition is sepsis and severe sepsis associated with the non-infectious process or condition. What is a non-infectious process? For example, some traumas. Traumas are examples for a non-infectious condition. In that case, our first code will be that particular non-infectious condition. The second code will be the code for sepsis, and the third code will be, if severe sepsis present, it will be R65.2 and associated organ failure code. Next one is MRSA conditions or methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus conditions. First one, combination codes for MRSA condition. That is, if a combination code is present for the type of infection and the causal organism, that is the organism which causes the infection, then we should not code separately the code for organism. That is here P95.62 code for MRSA. Okay, which means if a combination code is present for the type of infection and MRSA, means no additional code is needed again for MRSA. Okay, so no need to code P95.62. The second one is other codes for MRSA infection. That is, in case if the combination code is not present for infection and organism, then we have to separately code B95.62, the code for organism. Next one is MSSA and MRSA colonization. Methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus and methicillin susceptible Staphylococcus aureus colonization. So what is colonization? Colonization means the microorganism will be present in our body, in the patient's body, but they will not produce an illness. External illness will not be produced. But they can act as a carrier and they can transmit the infection to another person. That is colonization. So, if the condition is colonization, the provider will be documented as MRSA screen positive or MRSA nasal swab positive. So, the code for MRSA colonization is Z22.322 and the code for MSSA colonization is Z22.321. So, colonization means the organism will act as a carrier. There will not be a illness outside, but the person can act as a carrier for the infection. Then the next one is MRSA colonization and infection. That is, if both infection and colonization of methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus is present in same person, then we have to use two codes. That is both code for MRSA infection as well as MRSA colonization. So the code will be Z22.322 along with MRSA infection code. So this chapter is not complete. We have some more portion like Zika virus infection and coronavirus infection which will be discussed in part 3. So if you have any doubts, you can ask in the comment section. Thank you.